The air in Dr. Aris Thorne's bioengineering lab hung thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the acrid memory of burnt plastics. Beneath it, a faint, sickly sweet scent, something organic and rendered inert, hinted at the true nature of the devastation. I stepped over a tangled mess of copper wiring in what might have once been a high-precision centrifuge, the soles of my boots crunching on pulverized glass. The space was a testament to explosive force, a violent deconstruction of state-of-the-art research. "Accident, plain and simple, Reed," the lead detective stated, his voice muffled by his respirator, a stark contrast to the casual confidence in his tone. He gestured with a gloved hand towards the epicenter of the destruction, a reinforced workstation, now a twisted monument to a catastrophic event. "Initial assessment points to a runaway reaction. Something in Thorne's groundbreaking work went sideways. Or, maybe, a deliberate end." I said nothing, my eyes already tracing the contours of the damage. The detective saw only the obvious, the scorched walls, the shrapnel embedded in the ceiling panels, the mangled remains of what must have been incredibly expensive machinery. He saw a man consumed by his own ambition, or perhaps by despair. I saw a puzzle, laid out in fragments and char. The integrity of the main containment unit was compromised, the detective continued, consults notes from a pad, his breath fogging his visor. "Pressure buildup, rapid exothermic reaction. We're thinking either a miscalculation or a suicide by spectacular self-immolation." The man was a recluse, brilliant but isolated. Pressures mount. My gaze drifted past the detective, past the uniformed officers methodically bagging larger pieces of debris, to a section of a secondary console, surprisingly intact save for a distinct, almost artistic, scorch mark. It wasn't the widespread blackening I'd expect from a thermal runaway. This mark was a concentrated, intricate pattern, almost like a signature. It was too precise, too clean, amidst the chaos. My brow furrowed. That particular burn, that specific absence of ancillary damage around it, didn't sit right with the narrative of an uncontrolled explosion. A seed of doubt, cold and sharp, took root in my mind. I knelt, pulling a small, high-powered magnifier from my kit. The scorch mark was a perfect ellipse, about the size of a thumbnail, etched into the polymer surface of the console. The surrounding material showed no signs of blistering, no widespread heat transfer. It was as if a laser had kissed the surface, leaving its precise mark, then vanished. But a laser wouldn't cause this level of devastation. Not alone. "Anything, Reed?" the detective asked, his patience wearing thin. "Just the usual," I mumbled, my attention fixed on the anomaly. I carefully scraped a minute sample of the residue from the center of the ellipse into a sterile vial, then took a control sample from an undamaged section of the console. "Just collecting the usual. Need to confirm the accelerants, if any." He nodded, already turning his attention to a colleague struggling to remove a particularly stubborn piece of wreckage. My internal clock was ticking. The lab, for all its high-tech glory, was a transient scene. The real work, the patient, meticulous unraveling, would begin in my own domain. Hours later, the sterile hum of the air filtration system in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite was a welcome counterpoint to the earlier cacophony of the destroyed lab. I had shed the full biohazard suit for my usual lab coat, the faint scent of antiseptic replacing the lingering stench of burnt synthetics. My examination bay was a sanctuary of precision, gleaming stainless steel surfaces, an array of microscopes, chromatographs, and mass spectrometers, each waiting to tell its part of the story. I placed the vial containing the residue from Thorne's console under the stereo microscope. The initial scans of the larger debris from the lab had supported the detective's theory: high-energy thermal decomposition products, traces of complex organic compounds consistent with bioengineering materials, all pointing to an internal, catastrophic event. A tragic accident. Or a deliberate, self-inflicted end. But the precise scorch mark, that stubborn, almost artistic ellipse, not at me. It was too specific for random collateral damage. Too isolated. I adjusted the magnification, bringing the minuscule flecks of residue into sharp focus. They were dark, almost crystalline. I prepared a slide, adding a drop of solvent, and watched as the residue began to dissolve, revealing a shimmering, metallic sheen. This was not typical carbon char. This was something else. Moving to the scanning electron microscope, I zeroed in on the atomic structure. The screen flickered, resolving the image of the residue at an impossible scale. My breath hitched. The elemental analysis flashed across a secondary monitor: high concentrations of a rare earth element, specifically cerium oxide, alongside an unusual isotope of lead. Neither of these materials belonged in a bioengineering lab, especially not in such a concentrated, finely dispersed form. Cerium oxide, in that specific crystalline structure, was often used as a polishing agent, a catalyst, or in certain high-temperature ceramic composites. And that particular lead isotope? It was a signature. A signature I had only encountered once before, years ago, in a case involving a specialized, highly destructive breaching charge. My hand stilled, hovering over the microscope controls. The detective had seen an accident. He had seen a suicide. I saw something far more insidious. This wasn't a runaway reaction. This wasn't a miscalculation. This wasn't even a crude explosive device. This was a targeted, almost surgical application of a very specific, very powerful, and highly unusual compound. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to not only destroy Thorne's lab and take his life, but to make it look like something else entirely. The precision of that scorch mark, the specific, alien chemistry of the residue, it was a deliberate, calculated act. My determination solidified. This wasn't an accident. This was murder, cloaked in the guise of chaos, and I had just found the first, faint thread leading to its unmasking. The air here was cool, filtered, carrying the faint metallic scent of disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, even glow on the stainless steel surfaces and the inert form of Aris Thorne. He lay on the examination table, covered by a sheet up to his chin, his features still, almost serene, despite the violence that had ended his life. The medical examiner, a methodical man with precise movements and an encyclopedic knowledge of human decay, stood beside the table, a digital display showing internal scans hovering near his head. The primary cause of death is clear, read, he began, his voice flat, professional. Massive internal trauma, consistent with a high-pressure concussive force. Burns, primarily third degree, cover roughly 60% of his body, concentrated on the torso and arms. Thermal shock played a significant role. I nodded, my gaze sweeping over Thorne's exposed skin, noting the mottled patterns, the edges of charred fabric clinging to his flesh. Consistent with the lab explosion, then. On the surface, yes, the examiner conceded, adjusting a small camera mounted on a flexible arm to zoom in on Thorne's left forearm. But there are anomalies. The concussive force, while immense, seems oddly localized. The sheer power of the blast should have caused more widespread fragmentation, especially considering his proximity to the epicenter. Yet, here we have intact bone structure in several areas that should have been pulverized. He tapped a point on the digital scan. And these burns. What about them? I asked, leaning closer, my eyes tracing the lines of damage. And look here. He pointed to a small, unburned patch of skin just above Thorne's right wrist, where a faint, almost invisible residue clung. This isn't consistent with the surrounding thermal damage. It's almost as if something protected this specific area, or the heat source was incredibly precise. My analytical mind immediately flagged it. A protected area? In a catastrophic lab explosion? It didn't sit right. I retrieved my micro collection kit, carefully scraping a sample of the residue. Under the suite's bright lights, it appeared as a fine, almost iridescent powder. Any other oddities? Internally, the blast patterns don't quite align with a single, central detonation. There are multiple smaller points of impact, almost like secondary charges, but without any physical evidence of their source. It's a clean kind of devastation, if that makes sense. The examiner shrugged, a gesture of professional bewilderment. And then there's this. He used a pair of tweezers to lift a minute speck from between Thorne's index finger and thumb. It was a fragment, barely visible, of something dark, almost crystalline. Found this embedded under his nail. Doesn't look like anything from the lab's known compounds or materials. I took the fragment, placing it into a separate evidence file. It wasn't metallic, nor plastic. It had a peculiar, almost organic sheen, yet felt hard, unyielding. My suspicions solidified. This wasn't a tragic accident. Leaving the sterile examination suite, I headed to the interview rooms, my mind already sifting through the implications. The detective overseeing the initial investigation had arranged for a few preliminary conversations. First up was the rival scientist, a man named Silas Vance, known for his cutthroat ambition and a long-standing academic feud with Thorne. The rival scientist sat across from me, a picture of tailored composure, his hands clasped on the table. Driven. Perhaps too driven for his own good. You two had a history of professional disagreement, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. He gave a thin smile. Disagreement is a polite term. Aris Thorne saw collaboration as a weakness. He guarded his research like a dragon its gold. My team and I were working on similar theoretical applications. Aris insisted on an entirely different approach, one he deemed superior. He often belittled others' work, mine included. He paused, a flicker of something that could have been resentment or satisfaction in his eyes. He was a brilliant mind, no doubt. But his methods, his secrecy. They made him enemies, read. Many enemies. Any specific enemies come to mind? Beyond myself? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He burned many bridges. One name that comes to mind is Maya, a former research assistant. She left his employ rather abruptly a few months ago. Said he was impossible to work with, constantly changing parameters, withholding credit. He was quite bitter about it. I thanked him, watching him carefully as he exited, his composure never faltering. The next individual was the former research assistant, Maya. He was younger, her face etched with a mix of anger and exhaustion. "Thorne was a tyrant," she blurted out, before I could even ask my first question. "He'd promise the world, then pull the rug out from under you." I poured 2 years of my life into his project, a project I helped build, only for him to suddenly change the focus, completely sideline my contributions. Threaten me with legal action if I even breathed a word of his new direction to anyone. Her fists clenched on the table. He was obsessed with that final project, said it would revolutionize everything. He cut everyone out, became completely isolated. Did you ever see him with anything unusual in the lab? Any materials or equipment that didn't seem to belong? I pressed, thinking of the unique trace element and the crystalline fragment. She frowned, thinking. He had this. A small, dark wooden box he kept locked in his personal office. He never let anyone near it. Said it contained sensitive personal effects, but he was always so cagey about it. And sometimes, he'd smell faintly of something odd, not chemicals, but earthy. Like damp soil and something else, something metallic, but not iron. An earthy, metallic scent. That resonated with the residue I'd found. The pieces were starting to form a more complex picture, one far removed from a simple accident. The perpetrator wasn't just familiar with the lab, they were familiar with Thorne himself, his habits, his vulnerabilities. And they had left just enough behind to catch the eye of someone who knew how to look. My work was only just beginning. It was a place designed for precision, for dismantling chaos into digestible facts, and I welcomed its unforgiving clarity. Spread across the large, cool surface of the examination table were Thorne's digital remnants, a secured tablet, 3 encrypted hard drives, and a state-of-the-art laptop, all retrieved from the wreckage of his research facility. The air, scrubbed clean of any lingering particulate, felt thin, almost artificial. I'd spent the better part of the morning peeling back layers of encryption, a painstaking process that required specialized tools and an almost obsessive patience. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance of microtweezers and chemical reagents, now navigated digital interfaces with equal care. The initial sweep by the cyber forensics unit had confirmed the high-level security protocols Thorne had implemented, but it was my job to find the cracks, the anomalies that spoke of human interference. Thorne's research, even in its encrypted state, hinted at its scope. Project titles like Genesis strain and recombinant life pathways flashed across the diagnostic screens, accompanied by complex data sets that suggested advanced genetic sequencing. I wasn't a geneticist, but I understood the implications. This wasn't just theoretical science, it was applied, potentially revolutionary, capable of reshaping global health or, in the wrong hands, becoming a tool of immense destruction. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me, a cold stone in my gut. This wasn't just about a man's death, it was about what he created. I scrolled through lines of code, parsing timestamps and access logs. Everything appeared meticulously organized, a testament to Thorne's reputation for fastidious work. Too meticulous, perhaps. My eyes caught on a series of entries from the previous week, a flurry of activity in a directory labeled Project Chimera. The file modification date seemed to contradict the last recorded access logs. It was a subtle desynchronization, the kind that most automated systems might overlook, but my internal alarm bells began to chime. I cross-referenced the entries with the server's system logs. There it was. A gap. A brief, almost imperceptible window where system integrity checks had been suspended, followed by a flurry of administrative commands. Someone had bypassed Thorne's security, not by brute force, but with a surgical touch. The sophistication of the intrusion spoke volumes. This wasn't a random hack, it was an intimate understanding of Thorne's system architecture. Diving deeper, I uncovered evidence of an attempted data wipe. Not a simple delete, but a multipass overwrite protocol designed to render data irrecoverable. It had been interrupted, likely by the catastrophic event itself, leaving behind fragmented, corrupted files within the Project Chimera folder. My screen flickered with red error messages as I tried to reconstruct the data. Someone had tried to erase Thorne's most recent work, and they'd come dangerously close to succeeding. The implications were stark. This wasn't an accident. This was a cover-up. A knock at the door pulled me from the digital labyrinth. "Read," the detective said, gesturing to a slight figure hovering behind him. "Maya is here. Thought you might want to talk to her." Maya, Thorne's assistant, looked even smaller outside the context of the lab. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest, her knuckles white. "Maya," I said, my voice deliberately calm. "Thank you for coming. In again." I gestured to a chair opposite me, away from the glowing screens. "I have a few more questions about Dr. Thorne's recent work, particularly Project Chimera." Her shoulders tightened. "Project Chimera?" Her voice was thin, barely a whisper. I don't know much about that." He kept it very close. "He started keeping a lot of things close, didn't he?" I pressed gently, watching her face. She nodded, a tremor running through her. "He changed. Over the last few months. He was different. Distracted. He started barricading his office door at night. Installing new cameras, even in the staff areas, which he never did before." Her gaze finally met mine, filled with a raw, undeniable fear. He said someone was watching him. That they wanted his work. Did he elaborate? Did he mention anyone specific?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No. Just. He became very paranoid. Started checking under his car, looking over his shoulder. He even changed his commute route every day. But he was so sure. He was afraid, Reed. Really afraid. He kept saying, 'They're coming for it. They're coming for Chimera.'" Her words resonated with the digital wreckage I'd just uncovered. Someone had been watching him. Someone had been trying to get to his research. And it wasn't an accident. It was a calculated, lethal strike, disguised as a lab mishap. Thorne had known. And his killer had made sure his secrets died with him. I leaned closer to the monitor, the microscopic trace from Thorne's lab, a speck barely visible to the naked eye, now magnified to an impossible scale on the screen. It was lodged in the sample chamber, bathed in the precise wavelength of light I'd selected. The previous chapter's digital wreckage, the attempted erasure of Project Chimera, had sharpened my focus. My fingers danced across the console, adjusting parameters, refining the beam. The preliminary analysis had been inconclusive, hinting at organic compounds, but something about the burn pattern at the crime scene, coupled with the unusual resilience of this residue, told me there was more. I needed a deeper dive, a spectral fingerprint. The machine word, a symphony of vacuum pumps and optical sensors. On the primary display, a jagged mountain range of data began to form, each peak and trough representing a specific element or compound. I cross-referenced the emerging profile against a vast database of known substances, environmental contaminants, common lab reagents, biological materials. Nothing matched. Not even close. This wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's bioengineering, nor was it anything I'd ever encountered in a typical lab accident. My jaw tightened. The initial findings had been a smokescreen, and this tiny speck was the first real breach. I switched to a more advanced spectral analysis mode, pushing the machine to its limits. The data stream intensified, a kaleidoscope of colors on the screen, each hue representing a different energy level absorbed or emitted. Then, it appeared. I ran the pattern through a specialized industrial materials database, one usually reserved for advanced manufacturing and aerospace components. The system word, processing, comparing. A green light flashed. Match found, the system's synthesized voice announced, devoid of inflection. My eyes locked onto the screen. The match was definitive, a rare, synthetic polymer. Its molecular structure was complex, engineered for extreme resilience and thermal stability. It wasn't something you'd find in a research lab, certainly not one focused on biological systems. This polymer was designed for high-end industrial applications, specialized coatings, advanced composites, components meant to withstand incredible stress and heat. It was the kind of material used in environments far removed from petri dishes and centrifuges. My mind raced, connecting the dots. This polymer wasn't accidental. It had been introduced. This wasn't a lab accident or a suicide. This was a targeted event, orchestrated. With a precision that bordered on surgical. And the presence of this polymer shifted the entire investigation. It pulled me away from academic rivalries and internal lab politics. It pointed towards external forces, towards entities with access to such specialized materials. Corporate entities. Thorne's research had been groundbreaking, potentially world-changing. Funding had come from various sources, but one name consistently appeared on the larger grants, Omnicorp. A conglomerate known for its aggressive R&D, its insatiable appetite for innovation, and its long history of acquiring promising technologies. They had the resources, the motivation, and very likely, the means to utilize such a polymer. I picked up my secure comms device, my gaze still fixed on the spectral signature. "Get me a meeting with Omnicorp's liaison," I instructed the operator. Today. The one assigned to Thorne's projects. Less than 2 hours later, I was seated across a polished mahogany table in a neutral meeting room within the federal building. The Omnicorp liaison, a man in a meticulously tailored suit, offered me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He introduced himself with a practiced charm, his voice smooth, almost too genial. He was prepared, I could tell, but for what, I wasn't entirely sure. "Reed," he began, "we at Omnicorp are deeply saddened by Dr. Thorne's tragic passing. A great loss to the scientific community and to humanity." He paused, as if expecting me to agree. I offered only a steady gaze. "I appreciate your condolences," I said, my voice even. I'm here regarding the specifics of Omnicorp's involvement with Project Chimera. His smile tightened imperceptibly. Of course. Omnicorp was a primary funding partner. We believed in Dr. Thorne's vision, his potential to revolutionize, well, everything. He gestured vaguely. Our role was purely financial and logistical. Thorne requested something specific. He was quite particular, as you can imagine. A genius, but with his own unique methods. Did he request a rare, synthetic polymer designed for high-end industrial applications? I watched him closely, noting the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his cuff. A specific polymer? He feigned thoughtfulness. I can't recall offhand. Our procurement department handles thousands of requisitions, but if Dr. Thorne felt it was necessary for his research, we would have provided it. We trusted his judgment implicitly. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. Was there something unusual about this polymer, Reed? Something that might shed light on the accident? His question was too eager, too perfectly phrased to sound helpful. He wasn't just being cooperative, he was fishing, trying to gauge how much I knew. That's what I'm trying to determine, I stated, keeping my cards close. Do you have records of all materials supplied to Thorne's lab, including their specific applications? Absolutely, he replied, perhaps a little too quickly. Omnicorp maintains meticulous records. I can have a full manifest sent to your office by end of day. We want to assist in any way we can to understand this tragedy. He offered another disarming smile. It's in our best interest, after all. We invested heavily in Dr. Thorne's work. I'm sure you did, I acknowledged, letting the implication hang in the air. His eagerness to provide information, while outwardly helpful, felt like a deliberate attempt to overwhelm me with data, to bury the needle in a haystack of irrelevant details. This man was not simply a corporate liaison, he was a gatekeeper, and he was hiding something. The rare polymer wasn't just a clue, it was a key, unlocking a deeper, more dangerous layer to Thorne's death. And Omnicorp, with its evasive representative, was now firmly at the center of my investigation. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the game had just begun. Around me, the specialized equipment, the scanning electron microscope, the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, the Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy unit, stood ready, gleaming under the bright lights. I leaned over a high-resolution optical microscope, my eyes fixed on the minuscule polymer fragments I'd extracted from Thorne's lab. The initial analysis had been tedious, a slow crawl through a desert of data. But perseverance, as always, paid dividends. These weren't generic plastic shards, they possessed a unique molecular signature. My fingers adjusted the fine focus, bringing a particular cluster of atoms into sharper relief. The spectral data I'd already gathered confirmed it. This polymer was no off-the-shelf component. This wasn't something you'd find in a commercial catalog, nor was it a byproduct of common industrial processes. It was rare. Exceedingly rare. I pulled back from the eyepiece, the faint impression of the rubber eye guard momentarily lingering around my eye socket. This wasn't a random contaminant. This was a signature, a fingerprint. Someone had either synthesized this polymer specifically for a purpose, or they had access to a highly specialized, perhaps experimental, production facility. The implications were significant. It narrowed the field of potential suspects from anyone to someone with very specific resources and knowledge. I felt a jolt of determined energy, a clear path forward now stretching before me. I made a note in my digital log, detailing the preliminary findings and outlining the next steps for source identification. Later that evening, the city streets were slick with a fine drizzle, reflecting the neon glow of traffic lights. I was driving my standard-issue sedan, the day's findings still churning in my mind, when a sudden, jarring blast of a horn ripped through the quiet. My head snapped up. A delivery truck, a massive 18-wheeler, was veering sharply into my lane, its headlights blazing, engine roaring. I instinctively swerved, my tires protesting against the wet asphalt, the sedan fishtailing precariously close to the concrete barrier. The truck thundered past, its air horn blaring again, the driver's face a blur of irritation or something darker. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It had been too close, too sudden. The driver hadn't seemed to be struggling with control. The maneuver had felt deliberate, aggressive. An accident or a warning? The thought settled in my gut like a cold stone. I was getting too close. I made it back to my personal lab, a small, unassuming space I kept separate from the main division for particularly sensitive or long-term projects. It was a habit from my earlier days, a sanctuary where I could work without interruption. The lock clicked, the door swung inward, and I stepped into the familiar scent of ozone and solvent. I flicked on the lights, my gaze sweeping across the meticulously organized benches. My eyes snagged on a small detail. The set of specialized microtweezers I used for handling the most delicate samples, the ones I always kept aligned precisely, parallel to the edge of the sterile mat, were slightly askew. Not much, perhaps a millimeter or two, but enough. Enough for me. I walked over, my breath held. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No forced entry, no obvious ransacking. Just that 1-minute displacement. My initial unease solidified into a chilling certainty. This wasn't bad luck, it wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been here. Someone had been in my space. The truck, the tweezers, they were connected. A clear message. I was being watched, my progress noted. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. My determination hardened, tempered by a fresh layer of caution. The chime of my secure line cut through the quiet of the lab. It was Maya. Can you meet me? I need to tell you something. I can't talk about it over the phone. Where are you? I asked, my voice low and steady, belying the surge of adrenaline coursing through me. A small cafe, downtown. Her eyes were wide, darting nervously around the room, her complexion pale. She looked genuinely terrified. What is it, Maya? I asked, sliding into the opposite seat, my gaze fixed on her. She took a shaky breath, her hands clasped tightly on the table. I should have said something sooner. I was scared. Still am, honestly. But after what happened to Thorne. And then you asking about things. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the table. Take your time, I encouraged, leaning forward slightly. It was a few weeks before. Before the incident, she began, her voice barely audible. Late nights, sometimes. Thorne would be gone, or I'd think he was. But then I'd see it. A light. In his lab. Not the main overheads, just a single workstation lamp. And sometimes, I'd hear faint sounds. Footsteps. Not Thorne's. He had a specific gait, a rhythm. This was different. Quieter. Just a glimpse. I was leaving late, thought I was alone. The door to Thorne's lab was slightly ajar. I saw a figure. Tall. Lean. They were bent over a console, illuminated by the screen. Always gloves, even indoors. I just caught the side of their face, partially obscured by the hood. They looked up suddenly, as if they sensed me, and I ducked back before they could see me properly. My heart was pounding. I ran. I thought maybe Thorne had given someone access, or maybe it was a new assistant I hadn't met. I didn't want to pry. He was so private about his work. Did you ever see them again? I pressed. No. Not clearly. Just the light, the sounds. But I knew it was them. They were in there, sometimes for hours, when Thorne wasn't around. Or when he was, and he just wasn't saying anything, he looked up, his eyes pleading. It wasn't Thorne, Reed. I know it wasn't. It was someone else, using his lab, his equipment, after hours. And I think they were doing something secret. Something Thorne might not have even known about. The pieces clicked into place. The specialized polymer, the threats, Maya's terrified confession. And I was next on their list. I stood before a bank of monitors, my eyes scanning lines of code, network logs, and environmental sensor readouts pulled directly from Thorne's lab. Now, I needed to prove it. A digital forensics expert, a woman with quick, precise movements, sat beside me, him fingers dancing across a keyboard. We've cross-referenced the timestamps. Almost imperceptible, starting roughly 30 minutes before the catastrophic event. Then, a sustained drop in atmospheric pressure, followed by a rapid spike. The data painted a picture of deliberate manipulation, not random failure. And the gas composition sensors? That's where it gets interesting, she replied, pulling up another window. There's a signature here, a trace element that doesn't align with the standard atmospheric composition or any of Thorne's documented experimental gases. It appears briefly, then rapidly dissipates, right before the pressure spike. The unusual burn pattern on the work surface, the way the polymer residue had spread, not explosively, but as if catalyzed by a specific environmental condition. I remembered the microscopic traces of a compound that hadn't fit the profile of Thorne's usual reagents. It was all starting to coalesce. Can you isolate the point of introduction for that trace element? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. The expert typed furiously. The internal environmental control system has redundant sensors. It looks like a localized injection, originating from a port near the primary containment unit, but disguised as a pressure release from a separate, smaller experimental rig. A phantom event, essentially. The system registered the release, but the gas analysis from that specific rig shows no corresponding activity. A phantom event. A deliberate misdirection. The killer hadn't just caused an accident, they had meticulously staged one. I pulled up the schematics of Thorne's lab, overlaying them with the environmental data. The primary containment unit was where Thorne had been working on the polymer, a highly sensitive material that reacted violently to specific atmospheric changes. The killer knew this. They knew the exact trigger. And the equipment logs? I pressed. Specifically, the thermal regulators for the polymer synthesis unit. The expert scrolled, then paused. Here it is. A brief, almost instantaneous surge in temperature, localized to the synthesis unit, coinciding precisely with the atmospheric pressure spike and the dissipation of that trace element. It's too specific, too perfectly timed to be a power surge. This wasn't a single act. This was a symphony of sabotage. A multi-stage manipulation, orchestrated with chilling precision. First, the subtle alteration of the lab's ventilation, creating an environment primed for the reaction. Second, the introduction of a specific, foreign element the microscopic tracite found, designed to act as a catalyst. Third, the remote override of the polymer synthesis unit's thermal regulators, creating the exact conditions for a catastrophic failure. And all of it masked by a series of phantom system events designed to mimic a malfunction. It was remotely triggered, I stated, the words heavy in the silent room. Someone initiated this sequence from outside the lab. They didn't need to be physically present when Thorne died. The expert nodded slowly. The network logs show an encrypted access attempt, originating from an external IP address, precisely 5 minutes before the first atmospheric anomaly. It bypassed the primary firewall and went straight for the environmental controls. Left no clear digital footprint after the initial connection, almost like a burst transmission. A burst transmission. A ghost in the machine. The killer had leveraged their intimate knowledge of Thorne's bespoke systems, not just to cause an accident, but to craft a narrative of an accident. They had known the vulnerabilities, the specific protocols, the very nature of Thorne's groundbreaking polymer. This wasn't a random attack, it was a targeted assassination, engineered to look like a tragic miscalculation. The implications were staggering. Whoever did this wasn't just a rival, they were someone deeply embedded in Thorne's world, privy to his most sensitive work and the intricate architecture of his lab. The level of detail, the foresight required to plan such a complex, multi-stage attack, spoke of a mind as brilliant as Thorne's, but twisted. A cold certainty settled over me. This wasn't just about a dead bioengineer anymore. This was about a killer who understood the very fabric of Thorne's genius, and had weaponized it against him. And they were still out there, hiding behind a meticulously constructed illusion. The digital ghost was real, and it was hunting. Not just an accident, but a meticulously crafted story of one. My colleague, a digital forensics specialist with perpetually tired eyes, pushed a mug of lukewarm coffee across the desk. Anything, Reed? We've gone over the system logs from the lab a dozen times. It's clean. Too clean. That's the problem, I murmured, ignoring the coffee. It's a digital cadaver that's been scrubbed by a professional. The physical evidence tells a different story. The microscopic trace, the specific charring, the way the lab's safety protocols were bypassed. It wasn't just a miscalculation. It was a performance. I stood, pacing the narrow space between the server racks and the workstation. The initial hypothesis, that someone wanted Thorne's research, felt too simplistic now. If it was mere theft, a simpler, less traceable method would have sufficed. They could have just taken the data and made the death look like a standard, tragic lab failure, but this elaborate, intricate sabotage that mimicked a specific type of catastrophic accident, designed to destroy specific evidence while leaving a plausible suicide or mishap narrative, it spoke of a deeper, more desperate motive. It wasn't about acquiring Thorne's work. It was about preventing its completion, its public release, its very existence. The killer wanted to silence Thorne, not just steal from him. Go back to the archive. Research logs, I instructed my colleague. Every single one. Don't just look for anomalies in the active files. I pulled up schematics of Thorne's lab, cross-referencing them with the thermal imaging reports. The unusual burn pattern, a localized, intense heat point that didn't align with the general explosion trajectory, began to make more sense. It was a targeted strike, designed to obliterate a specific object or data storage device, perhaps. Hours bled into one another. The suite remained quiet, punctuated only by the click of keys and the whir of cooling fans. My eyes burned, but a restless energy propelled me forward. I reviewed Thorne's public presentations, his academic papers, looking for any hint of ethical quandaries, any suggestion that his groundbreaking work might have a darker side. He was a brilliant mind, yes, but often brilliance comes with a conscience. Then, a sharp intake of breath from my colleague. "Reed, I think I have something." I was at his side in an instant, leaning over his shoulder. On the screen, a subsection of Thorne's personal research logs, previously flagged as corrupted data, was now highlighted. My colleague had used a specialized algorithm to reconstruct fragmented metadata. It wasn't corrupted, he explained, his voice hushed. It was deliberately fragmented and hidden within the system's own diagnostic files, disguised as system errors. A very sophisticated cloaking method. The file, once assembled, was heavily encrypted. "Can you crack it?" I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. "Give me a minute," he said, already running decryption protocols. The progress bar crawled, agonizingly slow. The tension in the suite thickened, palpable. This felt like the core, the true heart of the mystery. If Thorne had gone to such lengths to hide this, it had to be significant. Finally, the encryption broke. A stream of text flooded the screen. It was Thorne's own words, a personal log detailing his growing unease. Entry 147. October 12th. The implications are profound. My original intent was pure, to push the boundaries of bioengineering for the betterment of humanity. But the applications, the potential for weaponization, it's a terrifying prospect. Entry 151. October 20th, Omnicorp's interest has intensified. Their funding, while generous, comes with increasingly restrictive clauses. They're pushing for specific avenues of research, diverting resources from the humanitarian applications. I've found discrepancies in their internal financial ledgers. They're clandestinely funding a separate, parallel project. Something I never intended. Entry 155. October 27th. I cannot allow this to continue. My research is being twisted. The separate project. It poses a grave threat. I've gathered enough evidence. I will go public. I will expose Omnicorp's clandestine funding, their true intentions, and the nature of this abominable weaponization. The world needs to know. The last entry was dated 2 days before Thorne's death. This wasn't about stealing research. This was about silencing a whistleblower. Thorne wasn't just a brilliant mind, he was a man with a conscience, about to expose a corporate giant involved in something truly sinister. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. I wasn't just chasing a murderer, I was now standing on the precipice of a corporate conspiracy, a secret project that Thorne deemed an abominable weaponization. And the person who killed Thorne, the one who orchestrated this intricate act, was intimately connected to Omnicorp, deeply invested in keeping that secret buried. My hands clenched into fists. This was no longer just a homicide investigation, it was a race against a powerful, unseen enemy. And I was in their crosshairs. It was past midnight, but the glow of half a dozen monitors painted the sterile room in shifting shades of blue and white. My eyes, however, were fixed on the screen displaying a matrix of access logs, overlaid with employee profiles. Thorne wasn't just exposing a corporate giant, he was exposing a carefully constructed lie. That realization had sharpened my focus, stripping away the fatigue that usually clung to me by this hour. This wasn't a clumsy act of desperation. This was surgical, precise, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of Thorne's work, the lab's vulnerabilities, and Omnicorp's secrets. An inside man. I'd spent the last 12 hours sifting through every digital crumb, keycard entries, server login times, network activity, security camera blind spots, and even the subtle electromagnetic signatures picked up by external sensors. The explosion hadn't just destroyed Thorne, it had attempted to erase a digital footprint. But nothing is truly erased, not when you know where to look for the echoes. My fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up the detailed technical specifications of the sabotage. I filtered the employee database, cross-referencing every individual with access to the facility against a checklist of specialized skills: biocontainment engineering, advanced robotics, network security architecture, even obscure fields like atmospheric dispersion modeling. The list, initially hundreds long, began to shrink. First, it culled those without the necessary high-level security clearance. Then, those whose work schedules placed them miles away. Next, it eliminated anyone lacking the specific, multidisciplinary expertise required to orchestrate such a complex series of failures. The remaining pool was agonizingly small, fewer than a dozen individuals. Each profile was a mosaic of professional achievements, personal details, and digital breadcrumbs. A name kept surfacing, a constant presence in the higher echelons of access logs, the Omnicorp liaison. He had been a frequent visitor, his corporate role granting him unparalleled access to Thorne's facility, ostensibly for project oversight and resource allocation. On paper, he was a corporate administrator, a middleman. But something about his profile pricked at my investigative instincts. His employment history, while outwardly seamless, contained peculiar gaps, short, unexplained periods that didn't align with typical corporate transfers or sabbatical leaves. And his educational background, while listing an MBA, also hinted at specialized technical certifications that seemed disproportionate for a liaison role. I dug deeper, bypassing the standard corporate HR files and tapping into a more expansive, less filtered database accessible only to my division. It took some finagling, a few carefully worded requests to a colleague in data forensics, but eventually, a more comprehensive picture began to emerge. covert operations. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling finality. My breath hitched. This wasn't a corporate drone with a grudge. This was a professional. His early career, before Omnicorp, was a patchwork of short-term contracts with various private security firms, some of which had dubious reputations for industrial espionage. Then, buried deep within a heavily redacted government report from nearly a decade ago, I found it. A faint, almost invisible hyperlink, leading to a declassified case file from a corporate espionage investigation. The details were sparse, names redacted, but the core allegation was clear: a sophisticated theft of intellectual property, involving a competitor's groundbreaking bioengineering research. The lead operative in that case, though never formally charged, was described in terms that eerily mirrored the Omnicorp liaison's unique skill set and background. The report mentioned a close, personal connection between the operative and a senior executive at the company that benefited from the stolen research, an executive who had later moved to a high-ranking position within Omnicorp. The tension in the suite solidified, pressing down on me. Thorne wasn't just a whistleblower, he was an obstacle. And the Omnicorp liaison wasn't just a corporate figurehead, he was a ghost from a past scandal, resurrected to silence the truth. His motive wasn't merely about protecting Omnicorp's current secrets, it was about protecting a much older, more insidious network, a pattern of behavior designed to eliminate anyone who threatened their illicit gains. Thorne's last project, his conscience-driven research, must have threatened to expose that entire, rotten foundation. The Omnicorp liaison had the means, the opportunity, the technical skill, and now, a motive that ran deeper than just corporate loyalty. I had my prime suspect. And the game had just gotten a lot more dangerous. My eyes, gritty from lack of sleep, scanned the lines of code on the main display. This was it. The bait. I had crafted the false lead with surgical precision. A fabricated report, titled Project Chimera, Enhanced Stability Protocol, Preliminary Findings, sat on a secure network drive. It detailed a supposed breakthrough in Aris Thorne's research, a method to stabilize a volatile compound that, if true, would dramatically advance the very bioweapon development Aris had threatened to expose. The report was encrypted, but I'd left a backdoor, a digital breadcrumb trail designed for a specific kind of intrusion. I had also ensured a subtle, almost invisible, internal memo mentioning a significant development in Project Chimera's stability protocols had made its way to a limited internal distribution list. One that I knew the deceased's brother, David Thorne, had been persistently trying to gain access to through his cooperation with the investigation. He was too keen, too interested in the specific trajectory of our findings. The room was quiet save for the server's drone and the soft click of my mouse. He understood the delicate nature of the trap. We weren't just waiting for an intrusion, we were waiting for a specific reaction to a specific, highly nuanced piece of misinformation. Only someone intimately familiar with Aris's work, and the true, dark implications of Project Chimera, would understand the urgency of neutralizing this breakthrough. "Anything yet?" I murmured, my voice barely disturbing the silence. The network specialist shook his head, his gaze fixed. "Still clean, read. But the memo's been accessed from outside the network. A few hours ago." A knot tightened in my stomach. The waiting was always the hardest part. I pictured David Thorne, his carefully composed grief, his subtle attempts to steer the initial investigation away from anything but an accident. He had been a constant shadow, a concerned brother, but beneath the veneer, I'd sensed a predatory intelligence, a man guarding a secret far larger than family loyalty. Hours crawled by. Aris Thorne deserved justice, and Omnicorp's machinations deserved to be exposed. Then, a soft beep from the network specialist's console. "Read," he said, his voice low, "we have activity. An external IP, attempting to brute force the Chimera file. It's aggressive." My eyes narrowed. "Trace it." "Already on it. Proxy servers, multiple hops, but it's sloppy. Almost desperate." He typed furiously, lines of data scrolling past. "Got it. Resolving. David Thorne. His home network." A grim satisfaction settled over me. He'd taken the bait. The desperation the specialist noted was telling. David wasn't just curious, he was trying to bury something crucial. "Let him in," I instructed, my voice flat. "Let him think he's successful. Record every keystroke, every file accessed, every modification attempt." The network specialist looked at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You sure? He could corrupt vital data." "He won't touch anything real," I assured him. "This file is isolated, a ghost. Let him think he's erased the breakthrough. We need the undeniable proof of intent." Minutes later, the specialist nodded. "He's in. Attempting to delete the file. Now he's trying to inject something. A data wipe script. Looks like he's trying to erase the entire directory." "Confirm the deletion," I said. "Then cut him off. And alert the field agents. He's coming in." The digital world went silent again, the brief flurry of activity extinguished. The network specialist secured the system, isolating the compromised file and logging every detail of the intrusion. It was irrefutable. He sat across from me, his face pale but still attempting a facade of bewildered indignation. "Read, what is the meaning of this?" I was just trying to assist, to see if there was any progress on my brother's accident. His voice was strained, a desperate attempt at sincerity. I leaned forward, placing a tablet on the table between us. The screen displayed a timeline of his network intrusion, the IP address, the timestamps, the specific commands he'd executed. "This isn't about assisting, Mr. Thorne. This is about sabotage. You attempted to delete a fabricated report concerning a breakthrough in Project Chimera's stability protocols, then tried to wipe the server containing it. Why?" His eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. The indignation wavered, replaced by a nascent fear. I don't know what you're talking about. My network must have been compromised." "It wasn't," I countered, my voice steady. "We lured you in, and you bit. Because you knew that breakthrough would expose the truth about Project Chimera. The truth your brother was about to reveal." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The truth about Omnicorp's bioweapon development." His carefully constructed composure began to fracture. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "But that's not all, Mr. Thorne," I continued, pushing another piece of evidence across the table, a magnified image of a microscopic polymer strand. This polymer, a unique synthetic compound, was found at the scene of Aris Thorne's death. It was also found on the equipment you used to access your brother's lab. And, crucially, it was found on your clothing, specifically the cuff of the jacket you wore the day of the incident, despite your claims of being nowhere near the facility." His breath hitched. The carefully chosen words, the specific details, were like tiny hammers chipping away at his defenses. "This polymer," I explained, "is a signature component of a specialized solvent, one designed to rapidly degrade specific organic materials without leaving conventional residue. It's what allowed you to simulate a catastrophic lab accident, to make it look like Aris Thorne was consumed by his own work." I watched him, seeing the mask finally crumble. Aris Thorne wasn't trying to stabilize a breakthrough for humanity, was he? He was trying to expose Omnicorp for developing a weapon. And you were tasked with neutralizing him before he could. David Thorne's shoulders slumped. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of his defeat. He looked at the image of the polymer, then at his own trembling hands. A faction within. They said Aris was a liability. He was going to leak everything about Project Chimera, expose the weapon they were building. Neutralized. They knew I had access, that I understood his protocols, his lab's intricacies. They promised protection. A future. The truth, meticulously uncovered, finally laid bare. The truth, meticulously uncovered, finally laid bare. He offered no resistance, no last-ditch plea. Just a defeated slump of shoulders and a vacant stare that seemed to look through the reinforced glass, through the walls, and into some distant, desolate future. I watched the officer secure him, the metallic click echoing louder than it should have in the sound-dampened room. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, heavy and bone-deep. Not the kind that sleep could fix, but the weariness that came from seeing the ugliest corners of human ambition. The brother, driven by a twisted sense of entitlement and fear of obsolescence, had murdered his own kin to control a discovery he barely understood. "It's done, Reed," the lead investigator stated, his voice a low rumble beside me. The subsequent days became a blur of briefings, intercepted communications, and frantic legal maneuvering. David Thorne's apprehension was merely the trigger. The wider conspiracy within Omnicorp began to unravel with a speed that was both gratifying and terrifying. The financial irregularities, the suppressed research data, the outright blackmail, it all spilled out, a toxic deluge. High-profile arrests followed, a domino effect that started with lower-tier executives and quickly escalated. The corporation's CEO, a man who had always seemed untouchable, was seen being escorted from his sprawling estate, his face a mask of furious disbelief, captured by 100 telephoto lenses. Board members, research department heads, even a few politicians whose campaigns Omnicorp had generously funded, found themselves entangled in the widening net. The media firestorm was immediate and brutal. Every news outlet, every digital platform, screamed headlines about corporate malfeasance and scientific hubris. Images of Dr. Aris Thorne's pristine, high-security lab, now a crime scene, flashed across screens, juxtaposed with the stern faces of government officials. The public shock was palpable, a collective gasp of betrayal. The ethical debate surrounding scientific advancement and corporate responsibility exploded, fueling endless punditry and public outcry. Was the pursuit of knowledge inherently dangerous? Should groundbreaking research be subject to stricter oversight? Who controlled the future when the brightest minds could be so easily corrupted? I found myself retreating, processing the fallout from a distance. Every piece of evidence I had painstakingly collected, every microscopic trace, every unusual burn pattern, had played its part in dismantling a carefully constructed deception. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders. I had unmasked a killer, yes, but in doing so, I had also unleashed a torrent that threatened to engulf the very foundations of scientific enterprise. The future of Dr. Thorne's research, the very reason for his death, now hung precariously in the balance. The potential applications, the profound implications for global health and energy, were too significant to ignore. Governments and international organizations, initially silent observers, began to vie for control. The Department of Justice announced a comprehensive investigation into Omnicorp's entire portfolio. Representatives from the United Nations and Interpol, usually concerned with geopolitical conflicts, suddenly appeared in Washington, engaging in hushed, urgent conversations with State Department officials. Scientific journals, once eager to publish Dr. Thorne's theoretical papers, now ran speculative pieces about weaponization and global power shifts. The discovery, initially a beacon of hope for humanity, now felt like a dangerous relic, a Pandora's box pried open by a desperate man. I stood by a window in the suite, looking out at the city lights twinkling against the encroaching night. My work was done, the truth unearthed. But the consequences, the ripples from this single, heinous act, were just beginning to spread. It was late, past midnight by the digital clock on the wall, and the suite was largely deserted. Only a few scattered lights pierced the gloom of adjacent bays, illuminating forgotten equipment like silent sentinels. I sat at my workbench, the steel surface cold beneath my forearms, a single file folder open before me. Thorne, Aris. Case closed. The words were stark, definitive. Yet, the true closure felt more like a slow, painful untangling than a sharp snap. The financial irregularities had indeed been the thread that, once pulled, unraveled the entire tapestry. David Thorne's swift apprehension had been critical, but it was merely the first domino. The subsequent corporate investigation had exposed a network of complicity within Omnicorp, reaching higher and deeper than even I had initially suspected. It wasn't just about Aris Thorne's groundbreaking research, it was about its control, its weaponization, its ultimate monetization at any cost. I picked up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside, nestled on a square of black velvet, was the microscopic fragment of the unique alloy I'd found embedded in the lab's shattered ceiling panel. It was nothing more than a shard, barely visible without magnification, yet it had been the key. The specific composition, designed for high-stress, high-temperature applications, had pointed directly to a specialized manufacturing process, a process controlled by a subsidiary of Omnicorp, a process David Thorne had direct access to. It was the final, irrefutable link that tied the explosion not to an accident, but to a deliberately engineered device, detonated to erase evidence and silence Aris Thorne. My gaze drifted from the alloy fragment to the detailed schematics of Aris Thorne's final project, pinned to the corkboard beside my workstation. The intricate diagrams, once a source of fascination and frustration, now served as a grim reminder of the potential for both unparalleled progress and catastrophic peril. Aris Thorne had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, his brilliance undeniable. I ran a hand over my stubbled jaw, the weariness a heavy cloak. This case had taken its toll, not just on the victims, but on everyone who touched it. I'd spent weeks immersed in the meticulous reconstruction of a death designed to look like an accident, sifting through debris, analyzing residues, piecing together the invisible narrative of a crime. Each discovery, each confirmation of deliberate malice, had chipped away at something inside me. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion. Aris Thorne had believed in the potential for good, I was certain of it. But his vision had been twisted, his life extinguished to serve a corporate agenda that saw his genius as a commodity to be exploited, not a gift to be nurtured. The scientific community, once a beacon of shared knowledge, now seemed a battleground where breakthroughs were guarded like state secrets, their true purpose often obscured by layers of corporate espionage and cutthroat competition. A shudder, almost imperceptible, ran through me. I pushed away from the workbench, the chair scraping softly on the polished concrete floor. But then, what would be the alternative? To turn away? To allow the carefully constructed lies to stand? No. That was never an option. My commitment to this work, to the pursuit of truth through the silent language of evidence, was unwavering. Aris Thorne deserved that, and so did every other victim whose fate was obscured by deception. Forensic justice wasn't just about catching the guilty, it was about restoring a measure of order, a sliver of truth, to a world that often seemed intent on burying it. I placed the evidence bag back into the file, the alloy fragment glinting briefly under the overhead light. The folder felt heavy as I closed it, a final period on a complex, disturbing sentence. The case was closed. The primary culprits were apprehended, the wider conspiracy dismantled. The immediate threat posed by the unchecked development of Aris Thorne's research under unscrupulous hands had been neutralized. But the larger question lingered, an unspoken challenge in the quiet air of the suite. How many more Aris Thornes were out there, brilliant minds on the precipice of discovery, unknowingly navigating the treacherous currents of scientific progress and corporate greed? How many world-changing breakthroughs would fall into the wrong hands, or be perverted from their original intent? The struggle between progress and peril was an ongoing one, a relentless tide that would continue to crash against the shores of human ethics. As if on cue, a soft chime echoed from my secure terminal. A new notification blinked on the screen, a single, terse subject line: Priority Alert, Pacific Rim Anomaly. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. Another intricate puzzle, another potential tragedy waiting to be unraveled. The world never truly stopped spinning, and neither did the need for someone to look closely, to question everything, to find the truth hidden in the smallest detail. I clicked the alert. The screen filled with preliminary data, grainy satellite images, and fragmented reports. My weariness receded, replaced by the familiar spark of determination. The hum of the suite seemed to intensify, a silent invitation to the next investigation. My work here was done, for now. But the future, as always, remained unwritten, waiting for the next set of clues to be deciphered.